Sounds good. Thank you. The reading comes from John chapter 11, verse 55, going all the way through to 12, verse 8. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know, so that they might arrest him. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me."
I don't mean to make fun, but I will be frank that in the days of Jesus, everybody stank. These were the days before deodorant and soap and running hot water, and in that hot climate, as you can imagine, everything smelled bad and everyone smelled bad. Now you might be thinking, well, that was back in those days and they were used to it, they could handle it. No, they couldn't handle it. And by our standards they stank, and by their standards they stank. And the question on everybody's lips was, how in the world do you get rid of the smell? And therefore, it was quite normal when it comes to a festive occasion for the host or the hostess to bring out a bit of the perfume or the ointment and dab you on the head with some. And immediately you were enveloped by this shield of wonderful aroma and fragrance that just went around you, a protective shield that stopped your smells getting out and maybe more to the point, stopped the bad smells of everybody else getting in. And you couldn't have a party without somebody getting out the perfume. And so the catchphrase of the day wasn't "don't forget the Erigard," it was "don't forget the perfume." And if you remember that phrase, "don't forget the Erigard," you are officially old. And so this is a party that we've got in John chapter 12. And Mary and Martha and Lazarus are there. They're throwing this party to honour Jesus because of what he's just done for Lazarus and for the whole family, raising him from the dead just in chapter 11. And it would have been completely normal for Mary to bring out, in verse 3 here, the expensive ointment made from pure nard. Completely normal. So why do people react so violently against it? We'll see in a moment, I think, why John only tells us of Judas's response to what Mary does. He's got some narrative reasons for it. But if you go to, say, Mark's account in Mark chapter 14, there's quite a significant statement. It says, they scolded her. And the word there, scolded, means to bellow out in anger or snort or roar like an animal. And that's what just about everyone was doing. And so what was so outrageous here? What was it that was so shameful that people there were thinking it was disgusting and offensive, that just about everybody in the room started yelling at her? Well, first of all, I want to ask, what did she do? What did Mary do? And for those people who love structure, I've got 3 questions to ask in our sermon this morning, and each question has 3 answers. So there you go. What did she do? What did Mary do? First of all, she emptied the jar. Emptied the whole thing. John suggests it when he says it wasn't just that Jesus got a little dab on the head, that like normal people that you normally would, and experience the fragrance around him. But John tells us the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And then Mark's account, of course, confirms that when he says she broke the flask. And when you break the flask, that means you're using the whole thing. You're not using just a bit of it. Not just a little dab. The whole thing's coming out. That's what you're doing when you break the container. And the reason this was so astounding was that this ointment or perfume was incredibly expensive. Judas says there was a year's wages, worth a year's wages. And just about every commentator that I read, I think, said that unless these people, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, were members of a hugely wealthy family, this would have been the most expensive thing that they had, the most valuable thing in the house. And probably a family heirloom that would be passed down to each generation. And so what this really was the financial security of the family. If you had this ointment, probably in a size of a Coke can type container, very incredibly expensive ointment, it meant that if there was a famine or a war or some sort of turmoil that could easily happen in those days, it meant that even if there was absolutely no way that you could make money and work, your family wouldn't starve. It was a hedge against disaster. And therefore, probably when they saw her bring this thing out, they would have thought, yes, of course. What an honour. What a great honour to just dab a couple of drops of this on Jesus' head. But what she does is tip the whole thing out. But it gets worse than that. What she also does is she puts it on Jesus' feet. And at this time and place, dealing with the feet was considered unbelievably demeaning and incredibly humiliating. You must never ask anybody or demean someone by insisting that they come and deal with your feet. That was the cultural way of life at the time. So that in itself is astounding. And then the third thing that Mary does, gets worse again, is that she wipes the perfume and Jesus' feet with her hair. She lets her hair out. She lets her hair down. She would have had to have done that. She would have unbound her hair in public. And you might think, well, what's the big deal about that? But again, in this time, that was a scandal to do that. They bellowed at her. And Jesus says, leave her alone. And you can imagine someone saying, "Where's your sense of what's appropriate, young woman?" And Jesus says, her sense of what is appropriate is perfectly right. Because Jesus understood what Mary meant by what she did. So that's what she did, but what did she mean? What was she saying when she did those things? So that's the second question. What did it mean for Mary to do that? Here's what she's saying, I think. In all this, she's saying, I'm not going to respond to Jesus with any conditions. It is inappropriate to respond to Jesus conditionally. I follow him, I give myself to him, I commit myself to him unconditionally. In what ways? At least 3 ways here. She's not conditioned by the cost, financial cost. When she empties the jar and pours the whole lot of it out, what is she saying? She's saying, I'm going to honour him, and my honour of him will not be conditioned by cost. In other words, I'm not going to say, well, yeah, Jesus, I'll follow you as long as it's not too expensive. I'll follow you, well, as long as it's profitable. No, what she's saying is, I'm willing to give you anything. I'm willing to give up anything. She's not giving 10% here. This is not a tithe of her net worth. It's maybe 80, 90% of it. And what she's doing at this point is saying, I will follow you no matter what the cost, unconditionally. Then she goes even further than that when she deals with Jesus' feet. And she's saying here, my following of you, honour of you, is not conditioned by rights. We might put rights in inverted commas, so-called rights. When a Jewish person fell into debt with someone, for whatever reason, and they couldn't pay back their debt, they had to go into servitude, somewhere between what we might think of as a servant and a slave. And they lost many of their rights as they had to work off the debt. But the rabbis said, and rightly so, they said, I want you to remember, if you have a Jewish servant, well, that servant still has some rights. That Jewish servant is not devoid of all rights. And there are some things you can't ask that person to do. And the Jewish rabbis said that one of the things you must not do, even of your servants, is to ask them to unlatch your sandals and deal with your feet. But here's what Mary's doing. When she comes in, she's saying, I know even servants here in our culture have rights, but I give them up. Even for servants here in this culture, there are certain things you can't ask them to do, but I give up that right. I'm not going to follow you conditioned by my rights or rights. I'm going to let you, Jesus, set my agenda completely. There is nothing you cannot ask me to do. Not conditioned by cost. She's not conditioned by her rights. And then thirdly, she's not conditioned by desire. And what do I mean by that? I'll explain. I think this is maybe one of the most amazing bits of it all. When she lets her hair down, she's going even further again. You see, why were they scandalised? Well, there's all of these 3 things combined. But again, if we think about what was said at the time, the rabbis said that if a married woman lets her hair out in public, it was grounds for divorce because it was such a scandal. Why was it so scandalous? Because when a woman unbound her hair, it was said that this was a way of showing openness. This was a way of showing love. This is a way of showing intimacy. This is something you should be doing only in private, at home, with your most intimate family members. And that's what it meant in that culture. So what is she doing, Mary, when she does it here? Well, the reality is, it's very possible to think you've gone all the way with Jesus, but in fact you haven't. It's very possible to say, I will give up anything you ask, so I'll give up all my things. Then secondly, to say not only that, but I give up my so-called rights. I will obey you no matter what you say, no matter what the loss is, unconditionally. You can do that, but there's still something that you can hold back. You don't have to like it. Maybe just out of a sense of duty, you can say, yeah, I'm going to give up everything and I'm going to be obedient and I'm not going to question, I'm going to submit and do all of that, but still hold on to your affections and still hold on to your heart and still not make Jesus the thing that you delight in the most or enjoy and treasure. But Mary says, I'm not just going to give you everything I have. I'm not going to just give you everything I am. I'm not going to just give you control. I'm going to enjoy doing those things. I'm going to love it. I'm going to love you. I'm not going to hold back my heart, as it were. So you can do all the right things and still have your deepest delight in maybe your husband or your children or your job or your house or your holiday or your hobby or whatever. See, Mary's not saying here is she? Mary's not asking, well, what's the minimum I need to do to honour Jesus? What's the minimum I can get away with? Nor is she asking just what are the deeds I need to do. She's saying, I give you or I make you my deepest delight. Now, Judas, he couldn't see any of that. When Judas saw what Mary did, what did he see? He saw a complete waste. What a waste. All that expensive perfume poured or dumped on Jesus' feet. I mean, that perfume was worth almost a year's wages. What a waste. I mean, just think of what could have been done with that money. And so Judas says in verse 5, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to me? I mean, did I say that out loud? I mean, given to the poor. And both Matthew and Mark record that it was that the disciples and others rebuked Mary. But it's interesting is that John only records Judas's reaction. And I wonder if it was just kind of all the gospel writers not to record Martha's reaction here as she's busy in the kitchen working away and in comes the waft of this perfume and Mary! Or maybe the whole family was in on it. That's also possible, that Martha and Mary and Lazarus, they were all in on this. But the point here is John only records Judas. Why is that, do you think? Why would he do that? I think he has some good reasons for it. And that is, he's making a point. He's he's trying to teach us something. And he wants to do that by highlighting the contrast between Mary and Judas. You see, helping the poor was not Judas's concern. So verse 6. He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. No, Judas's concern was Judas. And John shows Mary and Judas in stark contrast. One wasted her costly perfume on Jesus' feet. The other stole money from Jesus' money bag. Judas was interested in following Jesus only when it suited him. He was only in it for what he could get out of it. And when he realised that the money wasn't going to be coming in anymore, and possibly also he was here, where's Jesus headed? He's headed towards Jerusalem, and there's opposition there. That's not going to be too good. Well, I may as well just get one last thing out of it that I can and sell off Jesus for a few pieces of silver. And as one commentator said, Judas gave up one source of sordid gain for another sort. And John here, I think, is challenging his readers, and he's challenging us. And God has a question for us as we come to this passage. Are you going to be Mary, or are you going to be Judas? Now, the reality is there's a spectrum there, of course, and this side of heaven, there'll always be a bit of Judas in us. But these are the questions we need to ask. Am I using Jesus? Am I sticking with Jesus as long as it profits me? As long as it's not too expensive. As long as I've got some say over what I can do. As long as I'm able to put my heart in other places. Do I follow Jesus? Well, as long as he gives me inspiration and solves my problems and helps me with my self-esteem and gives me more self-control. Or am I for Jesus because he is my deepest delight and ultimate treasure? No conditions. What was motivating Mary and Judas? This is not one of the three questions, by the way. It's just an extra one. This is for free, this one. What's motivating both of them? I think it's the same thing. I think it's their treasure. What they are treasuring is what is motivating them. To Mary, Jesus was her treasure, far more precious than money. To Judas, 30 pieces of silver was a fair price for Jesus. And in Judas's criticism of Mary, what we see there is what we hear is what unbelief thinks of those who give something precious to Jesus. What a waste. What an absolute... Why this waste? I mean, couldn't your time and money and energy and your mind be spent on better things? Why would you give up every Sunday to be at church? What a waste. Why would you give up a successful career to pursue maybe other ministries? Why would you risk your reputation with your friends when you speak about Jesus or live in a different way? Why would you encourage your kids to go overseas and do mission work? What a waste. Well, it's not good to waste, being wasteful is not a good thing, and waste, it's a bit of a trend thing at the moment, isn't it, to talk about waste? And I add it to the list of other trendy things that we do when we sort of try to make ourselves feel good that we're doing something but not achieving anything, as if drinking out of soggy paper straws is actually achieving anything at all. But it's not good to be wasteful. I won't get started on those things. And it's interesting thinking about this week, how many times at home I've said, no, we're not going to do that because that's a waste. We're not going to give some of the beautifully slow-cooked pork belly with crackling to the dog. That is a waste. So it's not good to be wasteful. So let's ask, this is the third question now. Why was what Mary did not a waste? Why wasn't it wasteful? And at least three things we can say here. And the question is really, well, why isn't it a waste when we set aside every Sunday of the month to be at church, or give up certain things, or pursue certain relationships, or encourage our kids in good directions? Why isn't it a waste when we do those sorts of things? Well, first of all, is because Jesus is valuable. Jesus is truly that valuable. See, at the end of all this, Jesus vindicates Mary, doesn't he? He says, leave her alone. And you're wondering what sort of tone Jesus spoke those words. What she has done is entirely appropriate. And then I think what is a better translation of verse 7, leave her alone, she has kept it for the day of my burial. Now, how aware was Mary of that? I don't know, we're not told. Certainly that was God's intention. And I think here at this point, Jesus is not saying much more than this is anticipating my burial. That is, this action is even more appropriate because I'm going to be killed soon. And there won't be another opportunity to do this. And so he says to them in verse 8, for the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. Now, Jesus is not saying here, don't worry about the poor, even though that's how people have read it. What he's saying here does not assume the poor are unimportant. Rather, this assumes the poor are incredibly important. And therefore, for Jesus to take precedence even over the poor, what's he saying? He's saying that he is unique. Jesus is unique in his importance and glory. Jesus is saying, I'm worth it. I'm worth your utmost devotion and adoration. I'm worth your wholehearted love and commitment. I am the bread of life, he says. The only one who can feed you and fill you and satisfy your deepest longings. I am the light of the world, the only one who can reveal what is true. I am the great shepherd who loves and leads and gives up himself, dying for his sheep. I am the resurrection and the life. But they certainly know that now. I am the great I am. I am God, says Jesus. How could it be a waste? How could I be worth anything less? And so John, later in his life, he writes in Revelation chapter 5, he says, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive what? Yeah, we know some of the words there. I think John is saying, worthy to receive everything. But that would be boring just to write everything. So he says, worthy to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honour and glory and praise. So spending yourself and your things and your energy and your reputation for Jesus is not a waste. because he truly is that valuable. And the second thing I think Mary knew was that Jesus provides. Jesus provides. Mary is confident that Jesus will provide all that she needs. And so she can give up the very thing which guarantees their financial security, because she knows that Jesus is a better guarantee. He can really provide all of my needs. And to follow Jesus means sometimes choosing to lose what the world says is gain. And Jesus is about to say, in fact, whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Hating your life in this world means foregoing worldly gain to have eternal gain that only Jesus can provide. And that's what Jesus has shown time and time again. He's shown that he provides. And not just a bit, in abundance. When he turned the water into wine, was it the cheap wine or the good wine? Was it a little or was it a lot? When Jesus fed the 5,000, or maybe the 12 or 15,000, were people hungry afterwards? Just enough, so everyone just had enough. Or were there basketfuls left over? And of course, Jesus had provided for Mary and Martha by bringing Lazarus back to life. So there's no doubt Jesus can provide, but it's what he's promised to do. Back in chapter 10, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full, or have it abundantly. So what are you going to put your confidence in? A flask of perfume? Like a bank account in the black? Or the gracious, loving, abundantly giving Son of God? It's not a waste to spend yourself for Jesus, because he truly is that valuable. Jesus provides, and then lastly, Jesus is magnified. Jesus is magnified. As Mary poured out the perfume over Jesus' feet, the fragrance of it was really evidence of the act that filled the house. As that happened, her display of sacrificial love for Jesus was shown. And how precious Jesus was to her was known to all in the house at that moment. A life of sacrificial love for Jesus commends Jesus to others. And it says and it shows to a confused world that Christ is gain, and the real waste is gaining the world while losing your soul. So, to quote from John Piper, again this morning, in his book, some of you have read on it, Don't Waste Your Life, that he wrote, this is what he says. He said, we exist to make Jesus appear in the world as what he really is, magnificent. If Jesus is an all-satisfying treasure and promises to provide all our needs, even through famine and nakedness, then to live as though we had all the same values as the world would betray him. The world is not impressed when Christians get rich and thank God. They are impressed when God is so satisfying that we give our riches away for Christ's sake and count it gain. When we embrace with joy the cost of following Jesus, his worth will shine in the world, and the cost itself will become a means of making him look great. The point is, if Jesus is not made much of in our lives, then that is a waste. So, was Mary's cost, great cost, a waste? Of course not. Of course it wasn't a waste, because it showed the greatness of her treasure, Jesus. Judas was the one who wasted his life. Well, someone is going to be telling you that you're wasting your life. Someone will be. Which one is it going to be? Jesus saying, don't waste your life? Or the unbelief of this world? It's either one or the other. See, the unbelief of this world, whether it's out there or still in our hearts here, says, giving up how much? Giving up how much money and time and energy for Jesus? Oh, what a waste. Foregoing a successful career so you can serve Jesus elsewhere? Risking your reputation as you speak about Jesus at work? What a waste. Spending more money to extend the building here? What a waste. Your son or daughter wanting to go overseas for mission work? What a waste. The unbelief doesn't trust that Jesus provides. I better not give all of that up. I should keep some for myself just in case. I better not give him my whole heart. Well, that might be too dangerous. Well, Jesus says, I'm worth it. I'm worth it in ways you never imagined. Trust me, he says. A life lived to delight in and display my glory is not a waste. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we do confess that often we find ourselves asking, what do we need to do to have just done enough? What's the minimum we need to do to tick the right boxes to say that we're living for Jesus? So how foolish that is, when what we should be asking is what will help us treasure Jesus more. And what we should be asking is what will help us show that we treasure Jesus. What will help us to know Christ and display him. And so, Father, our prayer now is that in your goodness and grace, you might give us a spirit which seeks these things, we ask, for Jesus' sake. Amen. Children in SKIDS program, which is from children in kindergarten up to year 4 at school. You may head out now for your program and morning tea. Well, is it worth giving up whatever unconditionally for Jesus? Yeah, sure is. Why? Because his mercy is more. I might say more than what? Well, more than anything. And that's the theme of the song we're going to sing now.